Hi everyone, I'm making this video a bit early today. The rain is coming down outside. It is a Wednesday, the 11th of October, 2K23. And yeah, it's very autumnal, and part of me looks outside and it's misery, and part of me, I've always had a thing with being cozy when the outside elements are challenging. So even as a kid, I remember it used to be nice on a Saturday night, tucked inside with a fire going and sausages or whatever on the plate, watching Saturday night TV, which used to be great back in the 70s. And the winds would be hammering outside and the rain's battering against the window pane, and I'd be there, tucked up inside, nice and cozy. So, we're second last chapter, folks, on this journey you've been on with me in the last 2 weeks. Ideas Without Legs, first published in, well, let's start, this edition is 1945. We're on chapter 22, entitled Silver Thread. Our inheritance has been built up and handed on to us by a race of fighters. They fought the war of arms. Some lived, some died in that war. They fought the war of ideas. Some lived, some died in that war too. Through the ages of history, the forces of materialism have been there, bid to overrun the world. In Britain, the battle has often been in the balance. Yet, time and again, the Christian heritage has been preserved and enhanced by a fighting force of determined men. After the fall of the Roman Empire, paganism engulfed the world, including Britain. It was then that our national greatness was founded by two groups of men who fought the war of ideas for Britain in a pincer movement from Scotland to Kent. They were led by Columba and Augustine, whatever. These men disagreed with each other in details, yet were allies in the war of ideas. They set out to capture the kingdom. They formed a plan. They drove out the pagan philosophy from the minds of the people, replacing it with a better big idea. So, within a few generations, Britain was changed from an insignificant cluster of barbaric kingdoms into a nation whose Christian life and learning were a lamp for Europe. Then came the counterattack. The Norsemen invaded the country and almost overran it, bringing with them blood worship and the cult of a super race. But Alfred was king in England. He was a far-sighted statesman. He spent long hours every day seeking God's direction. His faith rings out across the centuries. I say then, as say all good Christian men, that the divine purpose rules, and not fate. He fought the war of arms and won it. He fought the war of ideas and won it too. He converted the Danish king Guthrum to Christianity and stood godfather at his baptism. He captured the minds and wills of his enemies with a bigger idea than their own, after he had conquered their bodies in battle. Sir Charles Oman, in his History of England, says, Alfred made history. He was one of those rare spirits who actually turn back the flowing tide of circumstance and avert what seemed to be inevitable conclusions. He was the first successful champion of Christian Europe against the all-pervading, all-conquering Viking swarm. Why am I talking like this? I've got no idea. Perhaps it's because I'm getting giddy, because it's near the end of the book. A new onslaught by the forces of materialism followed the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a great new awakening in the spirit of man, but in many lands it degenerated into a throwback to pagan materialism on a world front, where the beauty of the human form was represented as the supreme beauty and the human mind as the most powerful force in creation. In England, the war of ideas was fought and won by groups of devoted men. First, Dean Colley, Sir Thomas More, and Erasmus, centred in London and Oxford, raised a standard against the trends of their age. Some of them died for their faith. Then in Cambridge, Tynedale and Coverdale held up the torch again. These two groups of men, of different character and opposed to each other on certain issues, yet were dynamic and effective allies in the war of ideas. By the quality of their living and their enlightened strategy, they were largely responsible for saving and developing the Christian tradition of the Renaissance in England. Without them, the literature and courage of the Elizabethan era, with all its passion and fire and genius, would have been impossible. Without them, there might have been no Shakespeare, no Milton, no Cromwell, no Pilgrim Fathers. From the spirit they spread grew the fighting faith of men like Drake and Howard of Effingham, who together turned back the Armada. Through them the Bible became the book of the people, the first and only book they ever had. Its language became the language of the ordinary man of the day, and its basic philosophy was the accepted framework of all our national living. Throughout British history, each clash point of the war of ideas has been more than just another effort to save and preserve the existing Christian heritage. It is always the struggle as to whether a new stage and fresh step in man's journey shall be taken, or whether Britain shall be dragged back to the jungle. The 18th century was a period of reason without religion. As the century moved on, moral decadence was reflected in the decadence of policy. We sank to a low ebb in our nationhood. Temporarily, the fire and genius of Chatham illuminated the darkness, but he had not the secret of the superforce of a new spirit. He did not understand how to produce the sustaining power for the whole nation. He could inflame enthusiasm, but not inspire moral character. The bankruptcy of policy ended in the loss of the American colonies. So less than 200 years ago, materialism carved up an empire. The Americans beat us in the war of arms, but the real defeat was in the war of ideas. The Americans had right on their side when they fought us, and when we had no idea in our national life big enough to capture and hold the love of those who had founded a new world. On top of all this, Britain was, within a few years, involved in an ideological war on a world scale. We were confronted by a materialist revolution in France, a revolution of the left, driving on towards world dictatorship in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity, directed by the supreme military genius of the age. Yet we beat Boney in a long drawn-out war. We went on to create what can prove to be the only enduring empire in history. Why? The answer lies in the life and thinking of a group of men like Wesley and Wilberforce. They outmatched the oncoming forces of materialism with the fire of a great awakening. Holy moly! They carried our Christian heritage forward. They saved us from revolution and defeat. They built into the country the spiritual strength and moral toughness that gave it frightening endurance. They fought the war of ideas to capture the thinking and living of the millions. Britain became an exporter of ideas as well as of goods. In the generations following Waterloo, Britain's ideas of Christian democracy and statesmanship expressed in the great trade union movement, freedom from slavery and oppression, parliamentary government, personal integrity and justice for all, helped to shape the lives of the many countries and to give the force of a mighty idea to the empire. Before the last war, the reaction of materialism began. Reaction is the right word. The isms, which in the name of progress march mankind back towards the jungle, are the most reactionary movements in history. The ideals of the past, rooted in our Christian faith, had called in question by the big ideas of men like Voltaire, Thomas Huxley, and Marx. The years following 1918 found us at an ebb of our spiritual greatness as a nation. So at the peace table, and after, we had nothing to give. We dedicated peace terms which were terms of expediency rather than principle. In some cases, they were too hard. In other cases, they were too soft. Like all materialist remedies for moral ills, by themselves they did not work. We had no fighting fate to capture and inspire the vanquished. We desolated them. We stripped them of their old allegiances and put nothing in their place. We left them bitter, cynical, a prey to materialism, maimed and empty. Hitler filled the vacuum. Meanwhile, we clung to watered-down Christianity and wishy-washy materialism. So we were spiritually unprepared for the resumption of the struggle 20 years later. We had kept material comfort and deprived our enemies of it. That toughened them and softened us. We became spectators in a world swept by great tides of rival revolutionary philosophies. These tides still sweep on. They are ideas which spring in minds, in men's hearts, and cannot be conquered on a battlefield. Some hope that moderates will maintain stability in a world of warring ideologies. They are like the moderate sheep who thought she would maintain stability between the mad jackal and the angry wolf. They are like the tipsy Irishman. Stereotype warning. He cycled home one dark night. He saw the lights of two bicycles coming towards him. Sure I'll steer straight between it. Sure I'll steer straight between them, says he. But they were the sidelights of a lorry. Today, the liberating armies of the Allies are freeing the captives of Europe and Asia from their chains. But unless the liberating armies carry with them a liberating philosophy, powerful enough to free men's minds, who can say what the next chapter of the world may be? There is an old story of the house which was swept and garnished, and, because nothing occupied it, 7 devils worse than the first took up their abode there. The last state of that house was worse than the first. For 1,000 years, through storm and shine, Britain has been shaped and steered by the most progressive and revolutionary idea so far produced to guide the thinking of mankind. It is the idea that true patriots are the men and women who accept a change of heart to meet the need of the future, that mankind is on the march and will become different. That is not the destiny of human nature to remain the same. Throughout history, that is not. Though we have stumbled, yet through the darkness runs the silver thread, bright in the lives of men and women who look fearless ahead. Men have served for Britain's glory, so may we bear on the story of a Britain ever greater, servant of God and man. It will need a bigger idea than any ism to outmarch the warring ideologies which bid for the world today. It will need the answering ideology, the big idea, to outmatch both left and right with its passion, wisdom and power, to fire the minds of men to action and to change the motive of their hearts from gimme to give. That is the future. This is the future. It is backed by the superforce of God's living spirit. It is not a mingling of political programs or a middle way between opposing groups of planners. It is an overarching and inspired way of life. We're on to our final chapter. I hope you're fine and dandy. And comments below. If you've got any comments or feedback,
that would be lovely to hear from you. Perhaps we could look over the garden fence at each other and have a cup of tea and discuss life's ups and downs, challenges, and the tranquility of just being in the now.